Right. Right, have you got, oh, that's my hand over there, look. Right, I'm going to go in the bedroom.
Okay.
Sit on the bed.
So good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to another Q&A session of Primeira Mostra de Cinema Irlandês no Brasil, first online Irish film series in Brazil. The series is being part of the 15th Symposium of Irish Studies in South America, Virtual Encounters, held remotely between September 21st and 25th, and organized by the Brazilian Association of Irish Studies and the William Butler Yeats Chair of Irish Studies at the University of São Paulo. My name is Thiago Moyano. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of São Paulo, and on behalf of the organizing committee, I would first like to thank both of our guests here today, opening our conversation about Sanctuary. We are thrilled the technology has facilitated and made this morning afternoon possible. I'm going to say a few words about both of our speakers so we can start our panel. But just a reminder, this session is being streamed live at ABEI YouTube channel, where you can leave all your questions in the chat comment page, or section of the page. So without further ado, Len Collin is best known as the director of the award-winning feature film Sanctuary, and also as a screenwriter for a number of TV shows, including Deception, The Bill, EastEnders, London's Burning, Ultimate Force, Casualty, and Hobie City. He is also a senior lecturer of arts at Northumbria University in Newcastle and a disability advocate. Pedro Lopes is an anthropologist and holds a PhD in social anthropology from the University of São Paulo. He is a member of NUMAS, the research group of social markers of difference at the University of São Paulo, professor of history at Escola da Cidade in the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism, and member of the Committee on Disability and Accessibility of the Brazilian Association of Anthropology. He has worked primarily on the following themes: social anthropology, social markers of difference, disability, intellectual disability, gender, sexuality, race, and accessibility. Once again, we thank you both very much. Thank you, Len, for being here, and also for so kindly letting us stream your film to a wide audience in Brazil, and also to Pedro for agreeing to contribute to our conversation here today. For those who are watching the panel, please leave your questions and comments on YouTube so I can share them with our speakers throughout this conversation. But I'd like to start then by asking Len to give us a brief overview of his film Sanctuary, perhaps by taking us back to the very beginning of this beautiful project. How did you come across this particular script and story? I believe most people from our audience do not know about Blue Teapot Theater or Christian O'Reilly's play. So I think maybe we can start there. We have here a group of scholars at the University of São Paulo who are deeply involved in studying Irish theater. So I think that they would be thrilled to know more about that. And also, since, you know, I cannot remember ever seeing a film in which the majority of the cast was people with disabilities. You know, I'm thinking here of even in, you know, mainstream television shows, TV series, it's usually, you know, one person with disability being, you know, focused, being the focus. And I think that the movie is very different in this aspect. So could you also speak a little bit about the casting and the process of shooting the film?
Yes.
Oh, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, interestingly, one of my influences for shooting the film was a 2012 Brazilian film called Coligas. Gabriel, Gabriel. Oh, I'm trying to remember his name, but it was a really good film that starred three people with Down syndrome as the main actors in a plot that saw them sort of robbing banks and doing various things almost by accident, but a beautiful film. Galvao was the name of the director, but I think that's his surname. But going back to the beginning of your question, I was I know I don't have a very Irish accent, but I am actually Irish, but my accent is London. But I was living in the west of Ireland and very close to Galway. And I started working with Blue Teapot Theatre Company. I've worked in a number of theatre companies that deal specifically with disability. And with theatre in education was where I started off as an actor. So I was working at Blue Teapot Theatre Company, teaching the actors how to work with film. And at the same time, or around about that time, Christian was commissioned to write Sanctuary. And so I got to see Sanctuary on the first preview night, and I was absolutely blown away by it. It's really quite different from the film in many respects. Theatre, you can get away with certain things. So, for example, the actors were sometimes playing younger than their age, and the end of the film is very, very different to the end of the play, for example, because in the play there is a mock wedding, and it works for the play, but it wouldn't really work on film, because then you've really got to look at the idea of, would these people really tear down the curtains and use them as a dress? They probably wouldn't. So when I saw the play, afterwards, as all Irish stories start in the pub, this started in the pub, and I sort of turned around to Pedro, who's the artistic director of Blue Teapot Theatre Company, and I said, "You got to make it as a film." And of course, a few drinks were had, and Pedro was saying, "Well, of course you must direct it." And that was a process that took 4 years to get from that moment in the pub to actually making the film. Christian, the writer, and I had worked together on a number of TV series. So my career very, very shortly is that I started off as an actor, moved into screenwriting, and worked on a lot of shows, as you said. But this was my first directorial gig as a director of film, apart from a few shorts, of course. So what happened over that 4 years was we worked with the actors to help us develop the script further. I worked very closely with Christian on developing the script. We did all our research. I know the actors very, very well personally anyway, and we saw no reason to not cast them in the roles that they had played in the play itself, because all of the roles were pretty much based on characters that they had created. And the only thing we really did was become more realistic about the characters and what they could do. So, for example, the character of Andrew, who is played by Patrick Becker, he was played much younger in the play, and he's in his 40s. So we played him in his 40s. We didn't dress him so young, but he still had that energy. We applied for funding to the Irish Film Board, as it then was, Screen Island as it is now. And eventually we got the money, which was €800,000, I think, was the budget for the film, which I guess is round about $500,000 American dollars, something like that. Maybe a little bit more, actually. But in reality, it was about $500,000, because often the budgets are on paper not what they are in reality. And we started filming in 2015 in the November. It was actually November the 30th, is imprinted in my brain. November the 30th, 2015, we started filming, and we shot for 3 weeks one side of Christmas, 6 day weeks. 6 day shooting weeks. So we only took the Sunday off, although obviously I was always prepping for the next day anyway. Took a 2 week break for Christmas, and then 2 weeks after, shot for 2 further weeks in January after the Christmas period, which was kind of interesting, because if you watch the film carefully, you will see our lead actor's waistline expanding and contracting depending when it was filmed. So after Christmas, he was a little more rotund than he was before Christmas. And we also had an incident with our lead actress where she was living in a home at the time, assisted living, and her carers wanted to take her for a haircut for Christmas. And of course, that would have been disastrous because the film takes place all on one day. And she's screaming at them. She's saying, "No, I can't have my haircut. I can't have my haircut." And of course, they had to call us up then and say, "Is this true? She can't have a haircut." Yes, it's true. And we averted disaster then. Otherwise, she would have probably had to wear a wig for the rest of the film. The filming process itself went very, very well. I exercised a lot of patience because clearly that's what you have to do. But I also used techniques that if I wanted to get a certain feel from the actors in a scene, then I would use endowments to get that feel going first so that it was easier when the cameras were rolling. And by the end of it, they were all complete experts. So I think that's answered all your questions at the moment, or just in a nutshell.
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you. And that's funny about Christmas time. But yeah, so the film was or the play was written by Christian O'Reilly, but did it have, or did the actors participate in the process of creating that script as well?
Yes. I mean, what I did was I ran lots of workshops before we started filming over the years as well. And as scenes were written, I would then work with the actors and I would say things to them like, "Do you understand this word? Would you use this word?" If it's a word that we felt could be used, we would make sure that the character of Larry, for example, who's quite verbal, Kieran is probably not quite as verbal as Larry is, but he's an excellent actor. So I would always make sure that the script was tailored to each actor for what they could do, and also that they knew what they were doing and what they were saying, so they weren't exposed to any kind of misunderstandings. And that's really the way we progressed with it. So it was very much them, very much using their personalities. I've worked with them since early 2011, I think it was. So by the time we were filming, I'd worked with them over a 5-year period, not all the time, but going over and doing bits and pieces. And really, they become like a family. And you know, I'm the dad, and they're my kids, and sometimes you have to tell them off a little bit, but it's always gentle. But it was mostly about keeping it fun. But that process of me working with the writer, working with the actors, making sure that I was also the one thing I did from an academic point of view, which I think is really important, is I followed Colin Barnes's paper, Disabling Imagery, from 1992, and I used his paper as a manifesto to make sure that everything was done in such a way that we weren't hitting any particular stereotypes, that the characters were all very much talking from a place of honesty. And equally, I suppose one of the most difficult things was when directing, it would have been easy to try and get the actors to mimic non-disabled actors, shall we say. I don't like to put it in that terminology, but you know, I could have sat there and tried to get them to do certain emphasis, but it always came from them. It always came from them, because for me, it had to be a true representation of how they are and how they are together. And I think that's where the magic happens. I think for many people who are not familiar with people with intellectual disabilities, the first 10 minutes are probably quite difficult and trying. But usually after that first 10 minutes, everyone forgets that and they just go with the film. And I think that's its beauty. And it's all down to their performances.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm gonna ask Pedro to join in and maybe share some of his responses and questions about the film. Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thiago. I want to thank you for this invitation, and Mariana and the whole organizing committee. I've been able to watch some of the sessions of the symposium, and I've been learning a lot. And it's especially a pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel that made possible for me to get to know Sanctuary and also Len's work. I prepared some remarks to kind of express my interpretation of the movie, because I was inevitably moved watching Sanctuary, which is an amazing movie that I didn't know before. I will not take too long, but please, Thiago and Len, feel free to interrupt me if you want to speak or if I'm not clear. My English is a little rusty, I have to warm up.
Your English is a lot better than my Portuguese.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to start by locating myself in this conversation. I've been working with disability studies in Brazil through anthropology for some years now.
Yeah.
And part of my interests is to think about film, literary, and media representations of disability, and especially intellectual disabilities. From that perspective, it was an endearing opportunity
My apologies,
to watch. Yeah. Oh, no problem.
Right, I just got to do this quickly. I just got a
problem.
message. Sorry about that, guys. My apologies, everyone. I'm teaching a lesson at the same time and just got an email. There's no sound.
Oh,
sorry.
God.
Sorry. Carry on.
No problem. We are all multitasking in this moment, this COVID moment.
Oh.
Thank you. And so it was an endearing opportunity to watch Sanctuary, and I say endearing because the film has a singular sensibility in working with people with intellectual disabilities, especially Down syndrome, and providing new, powerful, and once more sensitive representations on this matter. Sanctuary may be regarded as a movie about many things. I call attention to three of them. One, I think the movie depicts mainly a couple in their negotiations to exercise their right to love, sexuality, and intimacy in a historical context that intentionally, be it for good or bad reasonings, prevents them from doing so. Second, I think it's a movie about the networks of care in which we are all tangled and through which we are all made. And third, I think it's a movie about everyday gestures, about beauty, about humor, and full of lightness and also cunning jokes, a sort of sharp and fresh perspective for life that reminded me of a lot of interactions I had with friends with intellectual disabilities. And so I'll make a few comments about these three interpretations and then refer back to Len with a question. First of all, so I think it is known that many people with disabilities have what we may be called a public intimacy due to the relatedness of their bodily day-to-day experiences, or in other words, due to the fact that many, and obviously not all, people with disabilities need other people to perform ordinary actions, such as using the toilet, moving around the city, etc. This is a question that becomes particularly acute in the subject of sexuality. The history of eugenics plays a major role here, but also the everyday planning about how much care is needed to provide for a good life to everybody. By that, I mean two things. One, exercising sexuality may result in reproduction, which means more care. There is a very sensitive and open discussion between Sophie and Larry, the two protagonists of the film, both intellectually disabled, about the possibility of having a child. This is one of many brilliant scenes where Larry says, What about if the child is like me? And Sophie asks back, you mean a boy? Which is very funny, but then Larry says, if the sun had down, it would be harder. In other words, there would be more care needed. If he didn't, wouldn't he be ashamed of me? This is a very powerful moment because it presents very real concerns about reproduction and family building. My second point is that sexuality, other than reproduction, sexual experiences may be run over by violence. Here we are no longer in the domain of sexuality, but the concerns about people's sexual experiences overlap with the concerns about abuse. To my understanding, this is the main historical issue or frame to the film, because in '93, a law in Ireland made illegal the sexual intercourse with a mentally impaired person, unless between married people. And in 2017, a year after, right, the movie, this law was reverted. The guarantee of the right to sexuality, though, as the movie shows, goes far beyond the letter of the law. Although the rights of people with disabilities have come a long way, the idea that they are profoundly or severely different from people without disabilities is still on the cultural basis of our world perception. This leads to my second interpretation of the movie as a movie about the networks of care in which we are all tangled. Our lives are made of social bonds and networks of care that produce our autonomy. In other words, autonomy may be thought as a result of care and reciprocity, not as a result of independency, of cutting one's relation to one's family or with the state. We can exercise our autonomy when we can count on the care of others and take care for others, even if it seems the other way around. It may seem that the people with disabilities in the film are subject of a lot of care. They even have Tom, the care worker, assigned for them. I would argue that the problem here is that their care networks aren't strong enough as the care network, for example, Tom can count. The possibility that he has to have one-on-one encounters with his loved ones, the possibility to properly move around the city, the possibility to find proper work. In other words, what makes the quintessential figure of the white, straight, cis, urban, non-disabled male independent is that he can count on everything working to his benefit, or we can say to his care. In my perspective, then, Sanctuary is eloquent in showing that it takes work, and it takes work of care for us to go see a movie, for us to walk around the city, for us to have sex, to have kids, to make new connections to what we call family. In another direction, still about care, the movie shows that we can't think about care without disregarding its counterparts, danger and control. To take care of someone is also to be put in danger, or let's say to be put in conditions of stress. Tom, the caregiver, the caretaker, lives this dramatically. Care workers all around the globe, and particularly in Brazil now, have been living this on a daily basis since COVID, the exposure to danger in the process of caring. To be taken care of is also to be controlled. And this ambiguity is shown in the film, not only in Tom's figure, but also in the figure of the institutions or the state. The state provides care, what we sometimes call social security, but also control through security forces. This is particularly interesting because a major figure of care in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities is not absent from the movie, but also is far from central, and it's their parents, their mothers and fathers. And so this leads to my third and final point, is that the image of parents in media representation of people with intellectual disabilities is a major feature in this matter. Sanctuary may be seen as a movie about everyday beauty, humor, and living life. And these lives represented in the movie as are the ones of adults with intellectual disabilities. Like any other adults in their cultural contexts, parents may or may not be central in their everyday business. Same as love, work, or friendship. Sanctuary is both a movie about people with intellectual disabilities in their mundane affairs, and a movie with people with intellectual disabilities acting a culturally and historically relevant story. Simple as that, it seems, but also immensely rare in our cultural landscapes of representation. By that I mean, Sanctuary isn't a documentary about how people with disabilities overcome hardships. It isn't a drama about how people with about how disability means suffering. It isn't a movie that treats disabled adults as children. It isn't a movie about the struggle of parents or caretakers. Being a fiction, I think it's especially important that it is acted by people with intellectual disabilities. That maybe more and more taken for granted nowadays, but it shouldn't be. Mason Zaid, who is a young Palestinian-American comedian with cerebral palsy, says that once she was denied a role of a character with cerebral palsy because she wouldn't be able to perform the stunts and in the play. And her answer was, well, if I'm not able to do the stunts, neither is the character. This is a very interesting point because Sanctuary, in its sensibility, deals with the characters and actors' tremors in handling delicate items, with the characters and actors' Down syndrome and fears around reproduction and family and so on. This is very sensitive, as Len was talking just now, regarding a strong sense of the word representation. It seems it's visible in the movie that it's a result of working together and in favor of people's abilities, disabilities, and modes of existence. So thank you, Len, for presenting us with a film so full of beauty. And I'm not sure if you want to make comments right now, but I may add a question in this to end this part of my participation. That is, if you could talk to us, tell us a little bit about the reactions the movie caused, and especially reactions from viewers with intellectual disabilities or even the cast as seeing the movie finalized. But thank you again.
No, thank you. I love everything that you said. I would really like a copy of that because I think your interpretation is spot on and exactly what I'm campaigning for, I guess, because it's very important to me that we get proper representation on our screens, because that's the only way that the conditions for people with disabilities of all kinds are going to change, is if the general populace has better understanding. And when you go to disability film festivals around the world, you see all sorts of different films. And even I, as someone who I regard myself as being right thinking, I'll watch a film that may be about people of small stature and be amazed at the fact that their kitchen is all down low on the floor, which is obvious when you think about it. But because I've never seen that in a film, I'm not necessarily thinking that way, because we're all, especially in this day and age with COVID and everything else, we're all thinking about our own circumstances and our own difficulties. But I think what's been interesting about COVID, for example, is that actually it's the first time that the general populace have been restricted in the same way that certainly people with intellectual disabilities are restricted all of their lives. told where to go, told when they can go places, who they can talk to, who they can't talk to, everything else. And so I think that's been something interesting to look at. But it starts with representation. You have to have authentic casting. You have to, because I think it's Sarah Kovic, Serbian American, who is an author who is deaf, and talked about the fact that she had never seen anyone on screen that represented her. So she ended up writing that. Those are the kind of things that we need to happen. People with disabilities need to write more. They need to generate more material. It probably takes advocates like myself to do that in the first instance, but it needs to get better. It needs to get better in all categories. The response to the film, to answer the question further, when I was in Australia, there was one woman who came up to me after the screening of the film, and she was in floods of tears, and she was in her late 50s, I would say. And she just said to me, I didn't know. I had no idea. And I said to her, well, why would you? Because we're not seeing films like this. We're not seeing that people with intellectual disabilities, people with Down syndrome, people with autism want the same as you and I. But why wouldn't they? At the same time, I also heard from a young lady with Down syndrome who said, I love this film. It's about us. And that for me was one of the best things I ever heard. It's about us. Following on from that, obviously, the law changed in Ireland. When we had our Dublin premiere, the Shanad had met just literally a few days before. But because we had won awards at festivals, and this was our national release, it was able to raise more awareness than the play was, because we were able to come into people's homes. We were able to be on big cinema screens. They knew it was coming, and people didn't know about that law, and it was a crazy law to begin with. So that's probably the greatest achievement that I'll ever have any sort of involvement with. It wasn't, of course, solely with the film, because people were campaigning for that law to be changed for years and years and years. But it was a tool that actually meant that it finally got noticed. And what's happened since then as well is the film has been used in a whole variety of contexts. So again, strangely enough, there's a lot happening in Australia where it's being used in situations to educate around sex and rights, human rights, in social care institutions. And in the UK, I'm working with a company called Vivo Care Choices, and I'm recording interviews with people with intellectual disabilities about simple things like because one of the things that I love in the film is when the two guys go to the pub. What happens in care situations is, you might be allowed to go to the pub, but your carer is going to come and pick you up just when you're getting started, or you go to a play and the play is finishing at 10 o'clock at night, but the shift patterns are such that you've got to be outside the front of the theatre for 9:30 so that they can get you back in time for the care to change. There's people who have had relationships over a number of years who, because of their care packages, one will get moved elsewhere. They need the parents' permission to marry or whatever, and these rights that we take for granted are denied them. And the film has become a tool for people to raise these issues, to actually make people feel emotional about it as well. Because once you're laughing along with someone, for me, one of the main things that I knew I wanted to do with the film was have the ending that we've got. I wanted people to laugh and be with people on this journey, and then at the end get that punch in the guts. And the stories that are in there are all true. They're all true. They're all based on the experiences of our actors. And the world needs to listen to that, because it's the way people are looked at with disabilities in different countries is it varies across the board. We know this. The film was shown in Cairo, and there it had quite an impact, because of course a lot of disabled people in Egypt, they don't make it to a certain age. The restrictions in certain countries in the Middle East are also challenged by the film, but because it's actually about people with disabilities, in a strange sense, it opened up other conversations, and it's been very successful in the Middle East as a film, because there, of course, it's not just disabled people who are fighting for rights. So it's also sort of been a good film to help people in recovery, which was evidenced by some of the conversations I've had with patients who have recovered from strokes. So to me, it's a magical film. It's a film I feel very passionate about. But I think it all comes from just not being lazy about your research and making sure that you are doing your best to follow that manifesto that Professor Colin Barnes wrote years ago, that actually you could apply to feminism studies, to queer studies, that they're all very much on a par. Because, you know, I watched a film the other night that's Bombshells or something about the Fox News kind of transgressions, and you're looking at that and you're thinking, how can this still be 2020? How can this was only a few years ago that this happened? And society, I think, does move forward, hopefully gets more liberal for us all to a degree, that we all share these freedoms, though of course we know that at the moment, just with the way things are going, you know, that's not the case in every country. So all we can do is try and get the message out there, I guess.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I enjoyed a lot while I was watching the movie was exactly this constant shift in terms of genre. You know, it's a love story, it's a comedy, it's a drama. You know, you can't simply put the film into one isolated box, right? And it's not, and the story develops. The story does not develop in a, you know, stereotypical way, I think, of, you know, maybe looking for a savior or having an answer, or, you know, and I think that was really, really great. I was thinking also, when I was watching, and then, you know, after watching, I had to do some research, because what you just said about the Australian woman, you know, saying, I simply didn't know. I felt, you know, I feel myself in the same position. And I was wondering, regarding the law, the Irish law from the 90s, would you say that that the Irish society knew about this law? I mean, did the majority of the population, were they aware of it? And what would you say would be their opinion about that law, you know?
No, quite simply, people didn't know about it. It was Section 5 of the Criminal Law Act, and who sits down and reads the Criminal Law Act with their morning coffee? It just, unless it affected you, then you weren't necessarily going to know about it. And equally as well, if you have an intellectual disability, being a self-advocate is difficult. It depends on the nature of your disability at that stage. So it was really, Petal Pili wanted to start that conversation because she's the artistic director of Blue Teapot Theatre Company. And what she noticed was just essentially how, if you have an intellectual disability in Ireland and you are in that system that was talked about, you are effectively always being watched, always being watched. And that I used as a theme as well. Even, you know, we have the Eye Cinema in Galway, and, you know, there is a big eye looking at you. I put the design of the eye in the bedroom. Anytime I could get an eye in the film, and that idea of you are being watched, which in a strange way is kind of like our digital footprints at the moment, that we, you know, everyone knows everything about us because of our spending habits and this wonderful thing that it is the internet. But no, people did not know. And that was the main impact of the film, I think, was people just becoming more aware in general of, and the actors themselves in Galway have become absolute stars. They're known. They walk down the street, and there are always people who recognise them. But one of the best impacts, I think, for me was Charlene, who plays Sophie in the film. Who, you know, she has that tremor. That's her tremor. She has at last been able to move into independent living, where she's living independently in a flat now on her own, with assistance still, but, you know, not in what was before a group home. So she can make her decisions of when she gets her hair cut. She can make her decisions of when she eats and when she doesn't. And that for me came about because she has been able to become more independent and get more confidence because of what the film did for her, in a way, being in that film, being that she's been on TV several times now, not necessarily as an actress, but as a spokesperson. She's written a play, and that was due to be performed at Galway 2020, but unfortunately, because of COVID, it's got put back now. But that's again, for me, it's all about representation, and that we just, the more we see society reflected on our screens fairly, the better we can all understand, and hopefully the less strife there would be in the world as well, and more acceptance.
And I was also thinking, would you say that this law, you know, making it illegal for people with intellectual disability or disability to have sexual intercourse, do you think that law was created because of sexual abuse and sexual violence, but simply ignored all the other aspects? You know what I'm saying? Do you think that law
Yes.
came from a place of trying to care, but
it did. It was what we call an Irish solution to an Irish problem, in a way. It was just a roundabout wrong way of doing things. It was revolved around a particular case where a person in a care home was assaulted, sexually assaulted, and a baby resulted. That case was separate to the case we reference in the film, because it's common knowledge that Charlene has a child. But we never go there with that. We respect what happened there, but that story is her story. It was the most difficult scene to film for that reason. And as I said, we don't publicize that much, but since you're asking the question, it was still going on afterwards. Yet they weren't allowed to have relationships with each other. It was just wrong-minded. And the argument has always been, there are laws that all are already in place. It is sexual assault, it is rape, it is already covered by criminal law. Why, as soon as you section out somebody else and say these people are different, then it's almost, in a strange kind of way, almost inviting some kind of different treatment. So yes, it was based on a particular case. They were trying to do the right thing, but it was a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And as usual, and as we see all the time, not enough consultation taking place, not enough due respect given to the people most concerned themselves. And more, we are seeing people with intellectual disabilities being their own advocates. So But that's what was for me even more shocking about this law that was still around. That when you look at Ireland as a country, where it's come from being dominated by the church to now being a more liberal modern society that still has respect for the church and all religions, but just has to give everyone the same rights. And that's what's happened. I mean, the laws that we've passed in recent years have made it one of the best countries to live in. So yes, I hope that's answered it.
Yeah, absolutely. Pedro, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, about this matter specifically, I think it's very important to have this conversation in Brazil, because as I was watching the movie, I could think of two very different responses to it in 2016 and 2020 in Brazil because of the moral landscape here. We have now we have Bolsonaro as president, who is an ultra-conservative president, and he has this Minister of Women, Family and Human Rights, Damares, who lives on moral and sexual controversies, allegedly protecting kids from pedophilia, but in fact preventing them from proper sexual education. And this becomes like a moral subject that is like a tool to prevent the guarantee of rights to a lot of people. And so it's very interesting to see how the movie became, as you told us, Len, a piece in this also moral and imaginative negotiations. And so for me it's very challenging to think how it would be watched in Brazil nowadays, because this government, this kind of thinking that this government represents, doesn't care for the content, right? It's like pins something in a movie or in a media production and then transforms this in a scandal. We had this happening like in this exhibition called Queer Museum. We had this happening to a lot of artists in Brazil that didn't necessarily had works about sexuality as a primary topic. And I don't think that the movie is primarily about sexuality, but it is also about sexuality. And this has been happening in Brazil a lot. So I think a question here is, have you had already this kind of backlash? Because I think this conservative and authoritarian backlash, especially concerning morals and sexuality, is happening in Brazil, but also in the United States. We have this kind of spin regarding the way history was positively moving in the sense of a more progressive world. We had in Brazil, we have the International Rights Convention for people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And in Brazil, this has been recognized as law with effect similar to the Constitution, like with the... It's added to the Constitution. We have now the inclusion Brazilian law. It became a law. And so from the judicial perspective, it's all very progressive in Brazil now regarding people with disabilities. At the same time, the government is cutting benefits for people with disabilities. So there is this contrast in this moment here that is very ambiguous. We have the sign language interpreter in all the government speeches, and at the same time, funding's being cut from all things related to disability. And so I would like to ask you if you have seen in the Irish context or some sort of reading of the film or this context that goes in this unfortunate direction that we have been navigating in Brazil?
In a way, the film's been very well received everywhere, and the kind of negative reviews, there are a few of them around there, but they seem to come from people who just think, well, you know, people who are intellectually disabled shouldn't have children or shouldn't, you know, and of course, again, that comes from a place of misunderstanding. You refer to that very speech of, you know, will he have Down syndrome? Will he be ashamed of me? You know, for me, again, I think it's great you picked out that particular section because, you know, you understand it and you know that just because one has Down syndrome and one has epilepsy wouldn't mean that the child necessarily has any of that. And there are cases around the world where Down syndrome couples have got together and their kids don't have Downs and are great. So I think to a degree there's been a sense, certainly in Ireland and certainly in the UK, of there was one critic who said this was a film you can't really critique. And that was probably as bad as it got. And it was kind of strange. It was on a radio show. And this particular critic just kind of thought, well, he was actually doing that thing of feeling sorry for the actors instead of actually watching the film and experiencing the film. So it's pity. And that kind of annoyed me more than anything, I guess. And I do get very protective of the actors, as you can imagine. But it was on a radio show where it's the type of radio show where they will pick people to take opposing views. And I felt he wasn't necessarily actually believing what he was saying, but just being the Katie Hopkins. I don't know if you've ever heard of that person, but there's this woman in the UK called Katie Hopkins who is always spouting off these right-wing views, and everyone hates her, even people with right-wing views. So, you know, it was kind of like that kind of a moment it felt, but it came from an odd angle. So I think generally speaking, the thing that I think is most difficult is getting people to watch the film in the first place. Because I think people who watch the film are maybe predisposed to want to watch the film. But the BBC and Channel 4 have not picked up the film to show on the television. RTE, who partially funded the film, have only shown it once and late at night, which was the wrong time to show it for people, because I think often there is a disconnect as well between the industry side of the entertainment industry, if you like, and the creative side. So whilst commissioners might understand the content on the business side, they don't know how to sell it. So I don't think the film has, whilst the film has gone all around the world and been shown everywhere, I don't think it's got the main stage presentation that it should have got. It really is a film that I think will grow and more people will find out about it. It's hard because you want to try and generate reviews, but I also want those bad reviews, because it's terrible when you just see a film with all good reviews. People think, oh, well, this is wrong. You know, it can't be like that. And also I want to expose those people who feel negatively towards the film, because I want to say, well, what are your issues? You know, why do you fear disability? And I think, you know, you look at the work of the academic Paul K. Longmore, Why I Burn My Books, a brilliant book that he had written about him burning his essays, very influential in America. But he says there's no easy, that the problem with our entertainment is we want easy answers to difficult problems. So when we watch someone like Daniel Day-Lewis play Christy Brown, yes, fantastic performance, but the audience are somehow kind of, they can walk away from it knowing, yeah, wasn't Daniel Day-Lewis brilliant? Instead of saying, okay, that Christy Brown is incredible. The real person is incredible. And it goes back to that story that you're saying about the person with cerebral palsy not allowed to play the part that they're right for. And exactly as you say, you know, if I can't do it, then they can't. And again, it's those tropes. It's those tropes of if you're blind, then suddenly you've got super hearing. Our biology is all the same. Your ears are made the same way if you're blind as anyone. You know, if you're deaf, then you've got something wrong with your ears, possibly. If you're short-sighted, you've got something wrong with your eyes. But you don't suddenly become superhuman with your hearing. It's these kind of odd tropes that people actually believe because people want easy answers and life is complex and difficult. And that's why, again, I wanted that punch in the stomach kind of ending of, well, the real story is kind of happening when the film ends.
Yeah, and I think that thinking about the industry in terms of representation, it's moved past so many other habits. Like we wouldn't accept a famous white actor playing a black character.
No.
We've moved past some of these things in relation to some categories, I would say, or in relation to some aspects of identity, but then that doesn't seem to happen when it comes to disability, right? Because we'll still have able or non-disabled. I apologize for not for not using the right terminology here, but we wouldn't, right? People wouldn't be outraged, or I feel like people wouldn't be, writing about how that movie director did not choose to look for an actor with intellectual disability, and instead, got Daniel Day-Lewis to, just play the part.
There was Gus Van Sant directed a film recently called "Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot," which was a Netflix film, and I can't remember actually the name of the cartoonist that it was about, but it's about this cartoonist who after a terrible accident becomes quadriplegic, and they cast Joaquin Phoenix to play a part where he is mostly being quadriplegic. The vast majority of the film is that. And you see him walking just in a few scenes at the beginning. And the excuse is, oh well, we need to do that. I don't know if you remember the film Superman, You'll Believe a Man Can Fly. Well, if we can believe a man can fly, can we not take someone who's quadriplegic and do a bit of jiggery pokery and just for the few scenes that they're walking in, work our way around that? Or, I think it needs to be rethought. It needs to be readdressed. I mean, it's never really about the acting either in the sense of, Joaquin Phoenix is a fine actor. Tom Hanks is a fine actor. Leonardo DiCaprio is a fine actor. Daniel Day-Lewis is a fine actor. But go and prove your chops doing something else, because the problem is they're wanting to do that is currently stopping people with disabilities moving forward. And what I want to see is a major star who is disabled, who is intellectually disabled. Marley Martin, I think, who is a deaf actress, is about the closest thing we've got to it, but only through one film, Children of a Lesser God. And, she's basically been working since then, but not made the star that she really should and could be. I think things are getting better. I think they're getting better all around the world. But as we've talked about, there now feels like there's a closing down of liberties. There now feels like the world is shifting through fear. We have a certain president in the other part of North America that's kind of odd to watch. So we don't know, but we can just trust that the human spirit wins through at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back to the movie a little and ask you a question about some of your choices in terms of how you presented the plot there. One of the things that I appreciated the most was how so much is told through these very minor details, right? And I'm thinking here about the way that Larry is introduced in the movie, right? Like we see, the first thing we see is his eye from inside his piggy bank, right? And also the way that Sophie is cooking breakfast, the way Larry likes to prepare her tea, which at the beginning, you know, first time they talked about it, it's not very clear why that is such a big deal. And then later on, she will explain, right, that this is sort of like the moment in which she fell in love for him because he was so considerate and he saw her, right? Like he was doing something, but really being, you know, caring for the person, for her, in a way that was not patronizing or, you know. So how do you find the balance here between what the characters are going to say explicitly and what you will reveal in other ways?
I suppose the best example of that is, for me, one of the very first scenes we filmed, in fact, I think it was the first scene, is Larry getting changed from his work clothes into his going out clothes. And it's a scene where he's struggling with a button. Now, when he was struggling with that button, the cameras are rolling for the first time, and none of the crew had worked with the actors before, or any actors with intellectual disabilities. So he didn't know what to expect. And obviously, if you've got Down syndrome, or with Kieran's case in particular, he's got quite thick fingers. They're bigger fingers than most of us have. So his dexterity isn't as good as it might be. So he's struggling with that button, and it should be a simple scene. And what he did was he eventually gets it open, and then he goes on to the next button, and the same thing's happening. And something wonderful happened at that point, because I could feel the sense from the crew, and they had never worked with me before either, most of them. So they had no idea what I was like, and the camera's rolling and rolling and rolling. And Kieran did this brilliant thing where he just took his shirt and pulls it up over his head. He had solved the problem. And as soon as they saw that he could do that, which, you know, many actors have problems and then they don't know how to solve it. So they say, cut, my cup isn't there. Quite famous actors as well that I can't name. But he solved the problem. And from that moment, the whole crew were on side. And equally, then my choice of how long I showed that for in the edit, I wanted to show that difficulty and the bacon sandwich and Charlene's hand moving, because then I don't have to show the problems with the condom, because you know why the condom didn't work, because he can't undo a button and she's got shaky hands. So it was using those kind of images to set things up, to come from a place of, for me, a significant moment is when he breaks the piggy bank as well, because that's him kind of denying and refusing his mother's choice to always keep him the child, which is a case for actually something to answer the other question was in terms of response. There is an author in Ireland called Ken Bruin, who's quite well known, and he has a daughter with Down syndrome who claimed to Blue Teapot Theatre Company for a while, but his wife came to see Sanctuary, as in the play, and wrote an article about it being disgusting and encouraging sex and people going to hotel rooms who shouldn't be going to hotel rooms. So there are those kind of reactions to it as well. But for me, in terms of setting the scene for the film, I thought those small gestures, those small difficulties, helps us to understand what might be happening in that bedroom, as well as the psychology of everything that's going on. And then the other characters that we haven't talked about so much, but that lovely moment, I think, with Michael Hayes, who plays Peter, and Emma Macken, who plays Sandy, where he talks about wanting to put a bag over his head and suffocate, and just that frustration that he feels. and wanting a proper job that like Larry has, but we know that Larry's just cleaning toilets and putting out balloons. It was that, and now again, it's because it all comes from them. So the choices of what to show when were to me quite crucial there, because I remember having an argument with the editor who just wanted to cut to quick change his shirt because all he's doing is getting ready, and I wanted to show that because then people have an understanding it's not so easy. Everything's a little bit more harder than it should be for many people, but the problem is solved. And it's, if that's your way of doing things. And weirdly, if we look at cinema history, that goes right the way back to Todd Browning's Freaks. So, you know, where you see the man with no arms and legs and lighting a cigarette with just his mouth. People with disabilities get on with it because that's their norm.
Yeah, that's great. And I was really touched by, you know, all of these moments, and I felt that they were very on point about presenting these characters in a very authentic, very genuine way, you know, like I also feel like they become more relatable in so many ways, right? When you get to witness some of their struggles, but also some of their ways out, right? They, as you said, they are sorting things out on their own, and you know, this is what we all do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's our instinct. We solve what's ahead of us. I have a few questions from our audience that I'd like to share with you. So Victor asks, he says, when I was watching the film, I couldn't stop thinking about some famous one-day narratives, you know, in literature, Ulysses, Mrs. Dalloway. And I'd like to know what were, you know, the references and influences as director for that choice. So, you know, the story happening over the course of one day. I was also interested about that. And I have to say, it added some anxiety for me as the viewer, you know, like I kept thinking, oh my God, the day, it's getting dark, you know, it caused an effect on me that I thought was interesting. So can you comment on that?
Oh, there's a crazy film with Michael Douglas in called Falling Down. It's not the best film in the world, but it does that kind of journey thing. There's The Warriors, was an old 1970s film as well, that does that one day thing. And I think it's such a brilliant device, because you can just start in the morning and see where you're at by the end. But it's also that thing of life often changes in one day. You can meet the person that you fall in love with. You can have an accident that changes your life. You can get that job that you've always been after. And to take the microcosm of one day, I think actually it brings you on both a joyous journey, but I think I think it's also it's almost like when you do things real time as well. We tried to make it work as real time as we could, because I think that brings you through that journey more easily. We didn't have to do any flashbacks. We didn't have to use any special techniques to tell the story. We just let you spend a day with these people, and you walk away and you want to spend more time with those people. So I wouldn't say there was any one particular film that influenced me at that point, but it's really odd, because I know as soon as I go away from here, I'm going to think, oh, I should have said that film, or I should have said this film. But it's, Victor's question is a very good one, which I will think about further. But there wasn't any one particular, but I do like that notion of you start the day out with a certain expectation. And actually, I do know one that I could look at, which is a big influence on me, is After Hours, Martin Scorsese's film. That is a very dark comedy, if you remember that film, and just how it goes from a guy meeting a girl in a cafe, and then because of his own psychology and paranoia ends up on this amazing kind of picaresque kind of story that pulls him hither and thither. So I think that probably, if I think about it, that's definitely been an influence on me and my writing. So it's probably in there somewhere. And there's also, in terms of, I know it's influenced Christian O'Reilly as well, the writer. We're both very fond of, Widnell and I, that whilst it doesn't take place over a day, it does that other thing of taking a person out of their usual location and putting them somewhere else. And for us, certainly some of the conversations we had was about their normal environment being quite dour, and we've even tried to increase the color palette as the film goes on. So you've got the Christmas fair, which is colorful. The cinema itself is colorful, but the colors are more muted at the beginning of the film because it's suddenly bright, and then of course by the end again they're back down to a source of reality, and that escapism of cinema as well is in there.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I was watching, I also kept thinking they have to be there right before 6, like that time kept in the back of my head. And I was growing anxious because every time Tom found someone, he lost someone else. And then at some point I was like, but it's so dark. And then I remember, well, here in Brazil it never gets that dark before 6. But like, oh yeah, we're in Ireland now, so I had to switch that button as well. We have another question here from Mariana, who is asking you to comment a little bit on the cityscape that you've selected, because it seems that the city plays an important part also in telling the story. So can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Well, it's definitely a Galway film. It was filmed in Galway, and Galway's a town of, I think it's about 300,000, the population of the whole kind of area of Galway, including the county. And it has a lot of different landscapes in a very close kind of distance. So you've got that wonderful river that one runs through. You've got the coast that is also featured. But it's also got this huge personality about it that I just wanted to capture, not least in its pubs. So that whole kind of, when Tom the carer goes looking for the two guys who are in the pub, it would be a nightmare to do that because there are so many pubs in that place. And even to the fact that no pub is actually called what it's supposed to be called. So Antubber, where they are, is actually now called something else, but also it's two bars in one. So one part of it is called Antubber and the other one is called something else, the Crane or something. I can't remember what now. So I love that scene where Tom looks and there's a guy by the hatch, and as soon as he swipes, the guys are there, but he's not seen them. And that came from location scouting there, and just going, as soon as I saw that hatch, I thought, oh, I can do that. So that wasn't in the script as such. That was something that you just, but also what we could do, because Galway's such a friendly town, was we thought, oh, we need to film in more pubs for this chase. So we'd just literally go into the pub and say, can we come and film in here for a minute? And we'd literally go in, and like that one, we would go through the circular bar. There was a Chelsea match on the television at the time, which I was probably more interested in at that stage as well, being a Chelsea fan. But, it has a personality in it and of itself, Galway, not just within its architecture and the people, but also within the fact that it can have 3 or 4 different climates in a day. We actually had a hurricane come in. The scenes that we shot by the coast were at the start of Storm Desmond, I think it was called. And to me, it was a no-brainer to film there. But we wanted to film it in such a way that it became any town, anywhere. But it does have its own distinct personality, I think. And all the crew, we were living there while we were filming as well. So we got to know everything. I went to university there too. So yes, it is a Galway film. It's very definitely an Irish film. That whole thing of the 2 pints for one scene, just love that. It gives me a warm feeling thinking of Galway in itself, and what a great town it is actually. So hopefully that comes across, that kind of love of the town as well.
Yeah, that was nice. You know, I've never been to Ireland, but it was certainly a nice introduction to a part of the country. You know, like I felt that the city was really being introduced, and you know, the way that the city is shown was very interesting.
Interestingly, just as a side point, next to Galway is a smaller town called Gort, and it has a very high population of Brazilian people there. So there are Brazilian restaurants there. I can't remember why the reason is, but people, there was some kind of jobs that were there that a lot of Brazilian people came and did, but there's great expat Brazilian community in Galway. So.
Yeah. I know there's a quite massive Brazilian community in Ireland, actually. And I think that it dates back from quite a while now. You know, it's not something new that's happened, you know, in the past few years. I think that there's a community that's well established there. And here also we have just a few comments from the people on YouTube. And Jessica Grant says, you know, that it's great that you talked about, you know, the need of writing coming from people with disability, right? And hearing these people. This week, we also had a panel discussion about another movie that is in the series, Michael Inside. And Frank Berry talks about how he interviewed people who had been incarcerated and how there was, like, you know, an extensive research on that. And I think that, you know, it's really important that fiction comes from this place of, you know, listening to these people and listening to their realities and, you know, the kinds of things that they experience day to day. You know, we know it's a work of fiction, but it has to come from a certain place, right? Like I think that shows a lot of, you know, a great deal of respect from, you know, the subjects that are being depicted, and I also think that was great. Pedro, would you like to comment or ask any?
Yes, I think taking back some of the subjects we've been talking about, back to the beginning of the movie, I think this part of what I would call like authorship of the actors in the making of the movie, the scene with the buttons and the scene making the meal, but also when Sophie, the character, takes her pills. The beginning of the movie is centered in self-care, or in doing the morning rituals. And this, I think, sets the tone for this aspect of the characters, that is the intellectual disability and the bodily matters that comes with it. And I think there is a sensitivity there that is around this, Len, that you said, that this sort of magical moment when the crew was filming, and the man that I don't remember the name, who plays Larry.
Kieran.
He was trying to unbutton the shirt. I think there is something there, especially working with people with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, that is the patience, so that things can solve themselves, and so that people can find their solution to their problems. And I think this comes with the honest dialogue, which means authorship in a sense, with people with intellectual disabilities. It demands their participation. And I think this is very interesting to be shown, because the movie doesn't say anything explicitly about this. But I think in the way the scenes are conducted, we can see that there is this sort of patiency or this temporality in the day-to-day things that people do. And this patience is very important, and it's the opposite of the timing of the end of the movie, when there is the ending of the movie, and there is all these interventions from institutional or state forces that like frame people as intellectually disabled, as unfit to do certain choices, unfit to perform certain acts, and etc. And so there is this delicacy, this delicate aspect of the film that has this different temporality. And I think, Len, just to add a question, I think we have some minutes, about the music and sounds of the movie, because I think that's an aspect that contributes very much to the rhythm of the film. So if you could say a few words about this.
Yeah, it was very important to me that it had a good soundtrack. And key, and at a very early stage, I thought of the Violent Femmes. And I just wanted that kind of music with attitude. So there's 3 Violent Femmes tracks. And then even there's a wonderful track called La Pistolas, which is by Johnny Perez, who I think is of Portuguese extraction. I think he's from Portugal originally, because I know I actually originally came across that record when I was working in Portugal on a project, and I just loved that rhythm to it, the aggressiveness of it, and I just wanted to mix up that music to not have anything that was going to be too wistful. And the composer Joe Conlon, I think, does a brilliant job as well, because his soundtrack to it, his composed music, gently underlines points that are made without becoming too it doesn't take over the scene. So it's just enough to give you a tone, just enough to it's almost, for me, it's almost like the songs and the soundtrack are just gently like a tuning fork for the actors, and to see how we can then resonate with their performances. So that's what I was aiming for. And I think Good Feeling at the end, which is such a beautiful song, but so sad at the same time, and just what we all want. We all want that good feeling. And it's just denied to people just simply because they're not allowed to do what they want to do or say what they want. And I think it also comes from a place of, because I'd worked with them for many, many years. I had been with them, for example, when going into a restaurant or a hotel and seeing the faces of the waiting staff that are kind of like, oh no, what we got here? And just missing out on the joy of the guys. You know, they are just such fun. I miss them when I don't see them for a long time, and I haven't seen them for a long time now. You know, they are just my friends. And it's the music for me was also making a statement about the people that they are, the variety of things that they're into, the lovely little moments where little Jenny Cox is sort of like saying she wants to see a horror film. William, who wants to see heads blown off. You know, they're what they like and what they dislike is as wide and varied as we all are. And I think there was a question earlier as well. Sorry, I'll pick it up again about their response to the movie, because I don't think I ever actually answered that for you. Their response to the movie itself was just magnificent. It being in Galway on the opening night, the premiere in the Galway Film Flower, they were all there. It was their red carpet moment. William, the guy who plays William, Frank Butcher, and Paul Connolly, who plays Matthew, they're sat next to each other and I'm sat next to them, and the two of them are just talking through the whole movie, and Paul's going, you were very good there, Frank. Oh yeah, do you think so? Yes, you were marvelous, Paul. And they're doing this all the way through, and I'm just chuckling. But the great thing is the reception they've had from it, the confidence they've got from it, and I think at the end, the thing that I am most proud of is their performances, and that they're preserved forever. That I think is, you can't buy that. I know there was something else I wanted to say in there, and I'm trying to think what it is now, but yeah, I'll leave it there on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I can only imagine, how exciting it must have been for them to see themselves on the big screen, right? And
yeah. Oh, I remembered what I wanted to say now. Sorry. I've often been asked if there's going to be a Sanctuary 2, or could there be a Sanctuary 2? And their response to that was, yes, they'd love to do it, but their idea of doing Sanctuary 2 is doing the whole film again exactly as it was, but with different actors playing the different roles. So that actually, Kieran wouldn't play Larry, he'd play someone else, and someone else would play him. So that was their idea of doing Sanctuary 2, doing the whole thing again, just with them playing each other's roles.
nice. Yeah, not exactly a sequel, right? But
No. But it would be interesting.
It would, definitely. It would certainly be very interesting. Well, I really, really want to thank both Pedro and you, Len, for being here. This was a lovely conversation, and we could go on for hours here. It's been a great pleasure. And, on behalf of the university and the organizing committee of the symposium and the film series, we thank you for your
Thank you for having me.
generosity. Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and just a reminder for our audience, the films will continue to be streamed until September 30th at www.spcineplay.com.br. So you can easily watch all of the movies there. Only within Brazilian territory, though, unfortunately. And the next session of the symposium will take place at 2 p.m. Brasilia, São Paulo time. So stay tuned. And if you want to just say a few final words, the floor is yours.
Thank you ever so much for hosting the film. Thank you for giving it that respect, actually. So thank you from the actors. Thank you from the writer, Christian, and thank you from myself. It really feels a privilege to be a part of that film, and I am just ever so thankful whenever people embrace it. So thank you to you, thank you to your audience, thank you to Pedro. I'd love a copy of this if I can have it, because I would love if Pedro's written down what he was talking about today. It's a marvelous response to the film. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Thiago, and thank you for all the organisation committee. So thank you, and good luck with the rest of the festival.
Thank you, Len. Sure, I can send you. It was a pleasure and an honor, really, to be part of this panel. And well, I'm gonna recommend Sanctuary to. I want to recommend to everyone who is watching right now, and also other people in this period that it's being broadcast in Brazil. But thank you so much, and also for this conversation today. Thiago, thank you again for the invitation. This was a pleasure, really.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you sometime, in person here in Brazil.
3D.
Yeah, when it's possible.
That would be lovely. That would be great. I've not been to Brazil. I would love to come. It's an amazing country. So yeah, that would be great once all this virus and everything else is out of the way. Thank you.